Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm joined today by Ulrike Guérot, who is a leading expert on European affairs. If not mistaken, you were also the foreign policy director of the German Marshall Fund and the director of the European Council on Foreign Relations. So, yeah, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thank you for having me. You were pointing to my positions in a sort of former life 15 years
Well,
ago.
the former life was part of the topic of today. I wanted to discuss some of the crises we have now in democracy in Europe, but I guess a nice precursor to this would be to discuss what actually happened to you, because you've been one of the, as I said, one of the leading academics on European integration and, well, Europe in general, and uh, I guess in this age of denunciation and cancel culture and a more narrow scope of acceptable opinions, ideological conformity, and there's probably a lot of ways this can be described. But I was wondering if you could maybe just start off by explaining what happened with your career.
Yeah, thanks for having me in the program. Yeah, I mean, to make a long story short, it's roughly since 30 years, say Maastricht Treaty 92, that I'm working on the history on European integration, doing classes around Europe, Paris, Berlin, Vienna on European integration, story of European history of European integration, Franco-German relations, the Euro making, all these things. We are talking now in the 90s, when we still had the dream of a functioning European Union. And I had many positions, and I have a sort of twofold career. One was always academic. I always tried to be in touch with academic positions, but I also had positions in so-called think tanks, NGOs, like the German Marshall Fund you mentioned, or the European Council on Foreign Relations, where we did applied policy. I mean, basically studies helping to do analysis of current political trends. And that was for a long while of my life, something like 25 years, from say in the 90s to basically 2013. And during these years, I became, if you want so, ever more critical. I mean, looking at Iraq, looking at the failure of the European Constitution, looking at the French no, the Dutch no, what is happening in societal terms with respect to European democracy, populism unfolding. And you could see the resentment against the EU emerging. You could also see that there were, how do you call it, American interferences into what was the shaping of a European currency first, but then a European foreign policy. Because the European Council on Foreign Relations, 2004, that's 20 years back, was designed to promote the European independent and sovereign European foreign policy. We are talking Xavier Solana, we are talking European security strategy, we are talking a time in which Mark Leonard, for instance, wrote his book, Why Europe Will Run the 21st Century, because the Americans were in Iraq, because Europe thought by then to offer a different model of global governance, rule of law, and so on. All this 20 years later, you look back, you feel like, no, it's totally perverted. Yeah. But when you were in the process, in the historical moment, you could sense that things are developing in the wrong sort of direction. But still, until, say, banking crisis, I had the feeling that we were in, say, in a different era, because we could discuss things until the Lisbon Treaty. I mean, there were always moments in time where you felt like, okay, Europe will get the curb, we will, do it. But then came banking crisis and Lisbon Treaty, and I felt like banking crisis was the beginning of the downfall. I mean, and then came austerity and refugee crisis, and you could see that the whole sort of system would ever more, implode and get ever more populist sort of resentment. And that was when I first had been fired in 2013 by the European Council, because I had a couple of very critical articles that the European governance structures are, dysfunctional. And so I was basically fired 2013. And then I was out of the more or less academic think tank community, re-entered the academic community in 2016 in Austria, had 5 years of professorship, then came to University of Bonn in 2021, and then wrote two critical books in 2022, one on the measures, corona measures, lockdown and all this, making standpoints on democracy and shifting basements of law. And then I wrote a book in October 22 about the Ukrainian conflict and the prehistory, Maidan, the whole thing. And that was the beginning of a long story of lawsuit with the University of Bonn, who ended up firing me officially for plagiarism. Yeah. But we are talking minor mistakes in an old book. So I think it was a pretext, and that's now on the second level of law and court decision.
There seems to be a common thread there. That is losing your first job there in the EU in 2013 for being critical, and then, of course, being critical again about the vaccines. Of course, some criticism should be seen as legitimate. Usually, these vaccines are rolled out after many years of trial, and this had to happen very quickly. But and same as with the Ukraine war, surely more than one perspective should be permitted. But why do you think did this happened? Well, at this point in time, why do you think 2008 was and nine, the global financial crisis, was so critical for this?
Well, I think it was in you are always you know always more today than in the past. Yeah, so man ist immer klüger, you say in Germany. You always get more wisdom when you look back, so you understand better the precedent periods. But we already have heard from Warren Buffett, this is a war of capital against labor sort of thing. That was really if you remember this 91 discussion, also Wall Street, occupation, Occupy. And we had this austerity policy, and we had the European left arguing strongly against austerity. We have seen a huge European technocracy taking over during banking crisis. All this smashing Greek trade unions, Portuguese retirement funds, and so on and so forth. So, and that was the moment when I had a very different argument, probably going along with, say, Adam Tooze, who wrote a big book about the crash, probably going along with the analysis of Yanis Varoufakis, who was very strong, and parts of the left still were. I think in a way the 2011, 12, 13 moment was the last sort of outcry of the, let's call it, old left in Europe. Yeah, we had the demonstrations against ECB, 10 years ECB, 2012, and there was a strong momentum. You remember perhaps the book of Stéphane Hessel, who was a French diplomat, very old one, beyond 80, and he wrote a book, Indignez-vous, empört euch, outcry for the young generation. Yeah, we are basically smashing European social systems. You had very big tensions within the European Union between the southern countries, the Latin countries, and Germany by then. And in my analysis, and not only in my analysis, that gave rise to the European populism. Yeah, sort of north against south tension, and then a couple of years later came the refugee crisis, and then you had a east-west sort of tension. Yeah, so crossover tensions in the European Union system. And I mean, that is the political decade we have been observing. Yeah, and as you say, I mean, critical voices should be allowed, and I feel like to some extent they were allowed. I mean, in the last, I mean, my remembering, say, in the years of the banking crisis, or even some years later, you could voice, say, left-wing criticism against austerity politics or so. Yeah. But then came refugee crisis. It was already harder to argue against. There was this welcome culture, and it was very easy to be blamed to be a racist, yeah, when you would make points against volumes of migration. And I wasn't in that discussion, by the way. I skipped the migration sort of thing, yeah. But then came Corona, and I would not even argue about vaccines. I would just argue that there is a basement canon of legal entities, and we were shifting legal entities. We had, in Germany at least, we had special measures. We had a council of our minister president of the Länder, which is an organ which is not in the constitution. So we had very special regulations for that crisis. And I just argued, or I posed the question whether this is so smart to basically change fundamental laws, traditions for a virus. Yeah, because we could argue about the figures. Is it really so damaging, and so on and so forth? But I experienced myself, because I'm in Germany. I'm a little bit known even before. I mean, since 20 years, I've been working for Jacques Delors. I was, I have l'ordre pour le mérite, so I have a certain standing also in German TV and radio stations. Yeah, so I was frequently invited on whatever panel discussions on European relations, Franco-German relations. And when Corona came, I just could sense, because I was familiar with German media, that something had changed, that the corridor of opinion would just be shrinking, and that there was things allowed to say and things not allowed to say. And if you were passing a certain border of arguments, you just would be blamed to be right extremist, or how is the English word, Corona-Leugner, in denial of Corona. Nobody was in denial of Corona. We were just posing questions. What are the appropriate measures? Yeah. So there were real blame game and denunciation, and it was strange. I mean, just a very new thickness, corridor shrinking in that, and then came the war in Ukraine. It was the same thing. So and today we even have research about it. I mean, today we do have the Twitter files. We do have the panels in the U.S. House, on TBC and Schellenberger. I mean, there are hearings in U.S. Congress which basically argue there was narrowing and moderation on Twitter, on which then became X. Yeah, so we can argue that our sentiment that there was a shrinking space of public opinion was not only a weird sentiment, but you can, with empirical data, you can prove, for instance, if you do discourse analysis, right? And you look at titles of German newspapers, and you would see over months of Corona, the ever same title in 20 or 60 German newspapers from national to regional level. Then this doesn't seem to be very pluralist media landscape, right? So what I want to say is that our feeling of some, I mean, those who were raising the finger, that there is something happening in the media landscape. Today, you can even argue it's empirically proven, yeah, that the space has been shrinking. And same with Ukraine.
Yeah, we have something strange in this country too. That is, we have a lot of political parties, a lot of media, but they all more or less say exactly the same thing. It's very strange. And as you said, when there's actual dissent, it's rarely met with arguments. And something I discovered myself. I think I went into it incorrectly. I thought, I would present my side of the argument, and then, one could map out where do we agree, where do we disagree, why do we disagree. But it was no such thing at all. Again, with the Ukraine war, I came with the argument that, expanding NATO that would result in the Russians intervening and effectively destroying Ukraine. That's essentially what I argued for 20 years. And somehow this was framed as being an apologist or legitimizing it. So I thought it was fascinating, because I also noticed here, and it's not just me, but in general, the discussion, it's those who say they stand with Ukraine, and which I find what a remarkable concept, because my argument was also premised on, what would be the ideal policy to save Ukraine? Because in my argument, what we're doing now guaranteed, well, what's happening now, the destruction of the country. So I thought my argument was a pro-Ukrainian one. But again, it wasn't my arguments versus theirs. It's they stand with Ukraine, and I am, I'm a Putin apologist. I'm a pro-Russian. I do talking points for the Kremlin. Very controversial. All these words, which doesn't really mean anything at all. I try to ask people as well, what exactly does it mean to be pro-Russian? What have I? What crime is this? But again, there's not really anything there. It seems as if the objective is not to counter arguments; it's to destroy your reputation.
Well, I first share the same sentiments and observation with you, arguing for peace is basically being pro-Russian, yeah, arguing for looking at both sides of the equation, what was happening, I mean, basically arguing, observing in a neutral way, because when you talk war, there are always emotions. War is always horrible, yeah. Nobody's in denial. Gaza as much as Ukraine. But then if you have an analytical look, you look about interest, actors, motives, yeah? And then just analyzing a co-responsibility of the West, which you could argue, and which most Americans I know, Fiona Hill or, Angela Stent or whatever, I mean, prominent American, Jeffrey Sachs, others, prominent American sort of analyst, even Kissinger, even Kennan, before he died. So there is basically an analysis even among US, Russian experts since late 90s, yeah, that there's the Brzezinski camp, which is this, eating into the Russian sphere. But then there is this other sort of discussion space, and there are smart Americans who have been arguing this for very long, that Ukraine into NATO, Bucharest Summit 2008 is crossing a red line, and they have been alerting the American establishment. And these people, I mean, we are talking American people writing for Brookings, writing for Foreign Affairs, yeah, and all this has been misrespected. Then you have a huge discussion in Germany, because everything started with 2+4 agreements and the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89. And so there is a huge talk about what has been promised to Gorbachev. And then you have some archives in London which show that there have been secret talks that never ever NATO would expand beyond United Germany. But then the question has been that written down? Is it signed? Was it only oral agreements? And then the argument is it was only oral agreements. But then you wonder, look, I mean, since basically the ancient time, an oral agreement, shake hand agreement, is the most of honorful agreement. Yeah. So if it had been agreed between Genscher and Gorbachev or Kohl and Gorbachev, it's orally an agreement. There are signs in the archives of London that has been done, and still we are an infringement of that agreement, yeah. And I'm in a tradition of German Egon Bahr, Willy Brandt, Ostpolitik, Politik de détente, security with Russia, not before Russia. And I feel like in my country, all of this long-standing tradition, which was a social democratic tradition, has been wiped off. And now we are into this, narrative that is security before Russia, clear-cut sanctions, border protection, whatever. And you feel like, what is happening here, and why we can't connect to, in essence, and that was my argument, why we Europeans, we can't connect to what we wanted in 1990, when after the wall came down, we did the Charta of Paris, and we founded the OSCE as an European security architecture with Russia. That was the idea, and so it's very weird to see how the narrative over 30 years, and that is my book, this Endgame book, Endspiel Europa. It's with Hauke Ritz, by the way, and the very smart author Hauke Ritz, yeah. And the third chapter basically has all the sources about what happened in Maidan, and then the civil war within Ukraine, and then what happened in the 8 years before the 24th of February 22, right? And we basically detail that this was a more or less planned operation, and you have, sources from Rand Corporation, from the Pentagon, and all of this, yeah. So either you look at the sources, then you cannot be in denial that there was something in preparation, right? And so obviously the Russians went over the border, and so that is now Russian aggression, blah, blah, blah. I agree, yeah. But the very fact that Germany has been losing the capacity to have a holistic sort of look on what has been happening over years, and that we start in German media always with der russische völkerrechtswidrige Angriffskrieg of 21st of 2022, as if the wall fall out of heaven. That's pretty, I mean, intellectually really stupid, yeah? And when you would like to argue against, you are a Lumpenpazifist, I mean, a Russian puppet, whatever, on the strings. I mean, that's basically what I am also denounced to be. and it's intellectually very poor. And I wonder how this could happen because we are still Europe. We have good faculties. We are accustomed to exchange of arguments, you know. So there's something really profound happening, and part of it is probably that there's no more really, how you would you call it? Say 30 years ago, I remember, or 20 years ago, we had very profiled uh, research on Russia. We had specialists on Russia and on Eastern Europe. We had people who would know Poland and the Duma and you know the Kreml, Kremlinology. You know, I studied, for instance, I studied in Paris in '86, DEA, Diplôme d'études approfondies, études soviétiques and Est Européenne. So Soviet studies and East European studies. That was is my diploma of '86. Yeah, and what we did is criminology, Khrushchev and you know the Andropov, Brezhnev, whatever. Yeah, and all this is, I don't know, wiped away by propaganda that Russia is evil and Putin is Hitler and stereotyping a context which I feel like is poor for European academia.
Yeah, it's but you also face this yeah, the thing you can call a culture of denunciation, because this is the yeah, the way when one steps over the line, what one is allowed to speak about. We see yeah, that colleagues and others have, you know, have to denounce you. I see something similar has now happened to Jeffrey Sachs.
Yeah.
We have and obviously it seems the main approach they often go for, as you suggested with you, the plagiarism, that academic honesty is a key thing. This is something I've seen with others as well. Actually, I had it as well, because whatever I would argue, there would never be a discussion. It would always be, well, that's what Putin would say, you know,
Yeah.
propaganda. And if you have enough of those that come your way, propaganda, then it begins to tear away at your reputation. And then suddenly and anyone can say, oh, he's known for propaganda. And there's no other way around it. And suddenly I noticed, you know, colleagues or others would then begin to challenge academic honesty. And
Mhm.
we even have fact checkers, which is
Yeah.
just lack of better word, really, really dumb, because it's they're not the thing they're fact checking. You can easily prove that what they're writing is false. So they're having false facts, and often it's more like narrative checks. So so it's
No,
very
yeah. It's very, I totally agree. I mean, I totally agree in the analysis. And just to give it to the to those who listen to this talk, there is a book now. The book is called Disrupting the University, and it's a sociological empirical study about removals of, firing in German, Austrian, and Swiss universities. And there are 60 case studies, among them myself, in which you find basically non-conformist academics who have had non-ideological conformity, you know, who wouldn't go the line. And then they have been fired. And the reasons were never that they argued this or that. The reasons were either they had a mistake here, or they found whatever, or a Me Too affair, or whatever. Something has been put on the person to blame the person, never the argument. Yeah, because this is not allowed in Germany. You know, on the surface it's obviously not allowed. We have freedom of science, we have freedoms of opinion, Article 5 German basic law. So you cannot fire somebody who's non-conformist. Yeah, but you can always find a mistake. I mean, who has not a mistake? Yeah, but just to say, I mean, I have also my case now, very interesting, because there's an Italian journalist called Thomas Fazzi, and Thomas wrote an article about my case that is entitled State Enemy Number One, The Political Prosecution of Mrs. Guérot. And this article, interestingly, has been translated into 7 languages now: Norwegian and Spanish and English and Turkish, I mean, some languages. And now I have been contacted by the European Council, you know, where the Europäische Menschenrechtskonvention, the Convention of Human Rights, yeah, not the Council of the EU, but with the 47 member countries, yeah, the European Council.
yeah.
So they are doing now a report on shrinking public spaces in freedom of opinion in Germany. And apparently, what they want to do is to put two case studies in. One of them, myself, my case, and the other is Francesca Albertese, Albert.
Albertese, I think,
Albanese,
yeah,
ja,
yeah.
Albanese, who is the UN High Commissioner or Sonderbeauftragte for Gaza, right? So the two cases. So it shows in a way that there is some, let's say, international awareness that things are going not good or dysfunctional in Germany. And I guess the Federal Republic will not be happy to see that they have a commission report at the European, because normally we say the whatever the non-functioning press, that's Turkey, that's Hungary, that's whatever, Iran. You never think that it could happen in democracies like us. So I think that it's a very interesting thing that the shrinking space of freedom of speech is now getting to that European Council sort of thing. Yeah. So, but I sent you the link because the book is interesting itself, disrupting the university. And it's 60 cases, and the book is from last year. In the meantime, the editors told me they have 15 more cases, so there is a problem in Germany. Yeah, and I wouldn't know whether I do think, from what I know, that the French, Italian, Spanish, Dutch universitarian academic system hold better. I wouldn't know about firing. But for instance, the European Council now wants to put into place a sort of open website uh, registering cases. Yeah, which I think would be a nice idea because I mean, I do not know to which extent it's a specifically German phenomena or to which extent it starts to be a European phenomena. But that is in itself a very annoying sort of a very annoying thing, because our self-esteem is that we are the free liberal European best of the world sort of system. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's this looking for things. I know actually it was 2 weeks ago. A journalist here actually got applied and got it approved to the university where I work to get all my documents from the application to promotion application to all my documents, and so they can go through every piece of paper I've written and all internal documents to see if they can find anything to use against me. This is there's no. It's an expedition to dig. It's just, and then the whole point is so it's nothing specific. It's just they don't like what you say. So now the process has been made to finish you, to cancel you. So they're gonna get you, and now the process has begun. They will find any
Yeah.
information, and they will look for ideally academic dishonesty, because this is how you can be fired from a university. So they will, yeah.
And they will find something. I mean, this is
Oh, of
really
course, yeah.
like in the Bible, yeah, who is without mistakes, throw the first stone. I mean, they found 10 mistakes. I mean, I have a publication list of 20 pages. So if you add all this paper and my 16 books, you have something like 10,000 pages of paper, and then you find 10 mistakes. I mean, and that they call plagiarism. It's totally absurd, yeah. But if they go behind you, and that is what I experienced, the moment you are on radar, everything is scrutinized. Every sentence in a video. I say a sentence which has a little spin, or because you talk 1 hour without, reading your things. Yeah. So you talk freely. Who doesn't make a sort of, perhaps there's a sentence which is not clear enough. Yeah. They would go behind the video, they would take off precisely that little sentence, put it on X and say, look, this Mrs. Guérot, again, she has a whatever weird sentence of Russian propaganda. Yeah. Take it out of context, whatever, go behind your weakness. And I think there is a strategy of intimidation, because if you see that growing on, I mean, I have been in a way prosecuted, if you want, so for 2 years now. Yeah. So the moment you feel like, oh, it's going down, there's a little bit of peace, something comes across the corner and you go up again in this. And then there is a propaganda mechanism, which is, as long as they tell for 2 years, Mrs. Guérot plagiarism, it's like you don't get rid of it. Even if you can prove it's not true, it's just like propaganda. If you say things 3 times, 10 times, 100 times, That is what people remind. Yeah. But what I would like to, I mean, I'm sorry for you that you are apparently now in the same scrutinizing mechanism. I would like to say a different name in Germany because I have a colleague who is at University of Halle, a very smart man called Johannes Warwick, and he's a NATO expert writing articles. I know him personally since 30 years, very smart. And he is, I guess, on the same position than you on Ukraine. I mean, just picking on this, prehistory instrumentalization of Ukraine, because in a way you are right. We want to defend Ukraine for abuse, getting instrumentalized by American geostrategic goals and so on and so forth. And he is under attack too. He has not yet been, say, fired, but he is in the same process that they scrutinized everything he has said, say, 10 years ago, hold it against him. There's a culture of, even in academic, I mean, let's remind this. In academic, you have a book, and then you discuss the book under friends, academic friends. Normally, what is happening is that the friends say, look, I like your book, but here there's a problem that you need to redo. That argument isn't sound. Look at this. I think your figures are wrong. This is what you would call in Germany a kind critique. Yeah. You help the author to improve his text. That is what academics do. Yeah. You look at the whole thing, what the person is presenting. Then you see two or three weaknesses in the paper. That is how peer reviews go. And then you say, look, you should reconsider that argument. There's a source missing, and perhaps your data go beyond your data again. Yeah. But today, that's not this kind, I help you to improve your text. Today is I scrutinize your text to find the mistake to kick you out. And that is not academic. That is the opposite. Yeah. So I don't know where we are ending in this. I feel like we should stop the game. I mean, because it's a game, it's a power game, it's a game on who holds which narrative. Obviously, there are strong forces behind. I mean, for instance, social media, I can post what I want, postings on whatever, LinkedIn, Facebook. And then I have trolls, I have the person who instantly would shout again, this Mrs. Guérot, Putin troll is,
Yeah.
yeah. But it happens within the 5 minutes after I'm posting. So it's not random. It's people who are waiting for my post to instantly react. So it's an algorithm, probably. Perhaps it's bots. But then the question is, who organizes these bots, And then you can check the account, for instance. Most of these accounts who do this is anonymous accounts. It's not people with a face and a name. Normally on X, it's accounts with 50 followers. So it's probably bots, automatically generated accounts who, when I'm posting, there is a, algorithm against. I mean, this is organized denunciation. Yeah. Which part of it is this surveillance, Digital Service Act, Susanna Suboshov, digital capitalism sort of control techniques. And, I don't know how to go out of this. I'm not a specialist on internet sort of things. Yeah. I'm not Peter Thiel. I'm not creating Palantir, So
Yeah.
I, I'm just a user, and you feel like you are totally spammed with stuff like this. And it's indeed psychologically not so easy to hold against, because that is what stands in the internet. If people go on Wikipedia, for me, I'm the most awkward person. And you feel like what is on Wikipedia about me has nothing to do with me. And then the question is, who writes that Wikipedia account? I mean, in the past 2 years, I could literally observe how I was, down, how do you say it, downwriting? I was downwritten on
Downgraded, yeah, or yeah, something.
and you feel like, okay, that's what Wikipedia tells about me. I'm happy that there's some persons who know me and who don't believe in Wikipedia. So, but I think there is indeed a problem, and the real question is what we do about.
Yeah. No, I noticed the same. You have the people who come with this smears, nicknames, propaganda, Putinist, they cite each other after a while. So as if this is established academic yeah, framework to give it more legitimacy. But I actually have one of those. My Wikipedia page actually had, I'm not sure anymore, at under occupation, a Russian propagandist, not a professor, but a propagandist. Is so there are activists who do this thing, and I'm not sure if it's organized by government or if it's just people are really convinced that they are, like they are fighting the good fight, that somehow they're standing up, for example, for Ukraine, and I'm standing for Russia, so they're going to fight this out and get rid of the people who speak on behalf of it. So I'm not sure if they genuinely believe their own nonsense or if they're just, yeah,
I think it's systemic. I think it's organized in a way because we are under the European Digital Service Act. I mean, there is organization. For instance, you can't read Russia Today. I mean, why we can't read Russia Today? We have the case that two German citizens living in Russia, Alina Lipp and Thomas Röper, who are doing blogs to inform about the war situation, which is just a legitimate war reporting, right? And they have been put on the EU sanction list, basically be in deprivation of citizens' rights. They can't go to Germany, although they are German citizens, which is totally absurd. And we haven't been seeing an outcry of, normally that should be a citizens thing where you have a huge outcry of German media and press and people saying, you can't be deprived of citizens' rights if you have a German passport to come into the country just because you are writing about the war. We are really falling very low on this now. There is a general thing I feel that the war is not intriguing many people. I mean, the peace movements are weak. In Germany, they are weak. I organized or I was on various peace demonstrations, and you see 10,000, 6,000, 15,000 people. You don't see 400,000 people like we saw in 83 when it was the Pershing SS-20 thing. So the peace movement is old. It's older than 60. The youngsters are not doing the peace movement. Yeah, so that we have many problems in cultural discrepancies about who has cultural hegemony, about which discourses and which age groups and so. And that is how it can go. I mean, in Germany, we have a clear war propaganda, war mongering. I mean, we have soldiers in schools. We have at the bus stations, we have photographs of the Bundeswehr, hire with the Bundeswehr, a huge salary, come to the Bundeswehr. So, we have a peace clause in the Grundgesetz. So normally our government is hold to engage for peace and diplomacy. We are talking about Taurus. So, it's really, and because, there is obviously a left structural analysis to do, which is in war times, because normal people don't like war, you need to cut the voices who argue for peace. Yeah, because if not, you cannot mobilize large pluralities for the war. Yeah, you need to make the argument that really Putin is imperial and wants to do Kiev, Berlin, whatever, all these arguments which are there. And if you have prominent voices arguing for peace, and you say, look, perhaps this is not the case, perhaps we should look differently on this, and perhaps we should distinguish between what is happening really there and what's the Russian security interest and so on and so forth. So a differentiated voice, you need to cut it down. Because if not, you cannot mobilize people to defend freedom and liberty. That's a mobilization thing. And perhaps people know Anne Morelli. You know Anne Morelli probably.
no.
Anne Morelli is a Belgium Italian historian, and she has written a book about the 10 war propaganda tools, how you need to orchestrate, like Chomsky, manufactured consent, how you need to manufacture the consent about war, and what are the 10 rules of war propaganda. And we are totally in this. The German narrative is only Putin is evil, the West is good and has done nothing. So you cut short the argument that perhaps we have a co-responsibility through all this NATO enlargement. Yeah. If the enemy attacks, it's always brutal. If we attack, it's only defense. Yeah. And then Anne Morelli goes 10 clear points. The book is on the market. I think it's in English on Amazon. And it's even on Wikipedia. Yeah. And you go through and you feel like that's precisely what we do. And what is amazing me I mean, we are 2024. I remember that 10 years ago, 2014, we had huge celebrations throughout Europe about remembering 100 years of World War One. We would send schools classes to the cemeteries in Lothringen and in Riga and Baltic states and Eupen Malmedy, and we would have all this education about never again, never again. And that is 10 years ago. And we all did this with public money. And 10 years later, we are spending the same money for warmongering. So, what happened in 10 years? It's amazing. I mean, even in sheer sociological terms, as an observation, what happened to society, it's amazing how within 10 years we could tilt discourses.
Yeah, well, it does seem on the wider problem of the decline of democracy and the acceptance of dissent in Europe is the fact that we have almost all arguments now are not just emotional, but they're moral in nature. That is, as you said, it's going into the, I guess, core of human nature. It's, us versus them, and you assign, good versus bad values. And the problem in such a scenario is if you're always good and always right, that means any opposition or dissent would then be immoral and wrong. So suddenly we end up in this situation where crushing the opposition is defending democracy. It's I don't know, it's quite spectacular to watch, and everyone's buying into this. Even journalists, they're becoming more like information warriors, it seems, because they all have to more or less defend the cause. And well, if you think always that the world is always divided between good and bad, between us who wants to just advance liberal democracy, and for example the evil Russians who just want to invade and build empire, you can't. Yeah, the whole premise of international security, that you have to understand the opponent, you have to mitigate their security concerns. This is appeasement, they say. So now the only way you can have peace is if you destroy or defeat your opponent. Not just the external other, but also within society. If you have people who are not following or towing the line, then you, for example, you're a bit too critical, then you also have to be uprooted effectively because you're not.
I totally agree. I couldn't agree more. And I happen to have a new book on the market in which I have a chapter on precisely this, basically arguing that there is what the Greek would call stasis. So a civil war, if you want, between liberalist and populist forces, yeah, who smash like this. And the liberal forces, because they are now shrinking support, yeah, for to make the argument to defend democracy, they sort of invent external and internal enemies. So what I argue is that you have a formerly liberal, today extremized or radicalized liberal center, and that center sees that the public democratic support is shrinking. And in order to get measures across which are basically eroding democracy, so getting ever more authoritarian, you invent enemies. An internal enemy, which are the populist forces, AfD, Orban, PiS, and the populists need to be defended because they are right wingers. Yeah, so we need to shrink the space of democracy because we need to defend democracy against the so-called populists. Those are the internal domestic enemies, and the external enemy is Putin, and Putin is Hitler. So the liberals are inventing enemies, internal and external enemies, so as to be able to do measures which in itself are eroding democracy in the name of defending democracy. Yeah, I think and we do it for a large degree with lawfare. For instance, Marine Le Pen gets into prison and can't go for the elections for a corruption affair. Sure, yeah, it was a legal court ruling, right? But if you look at Christine Lagarde, or you look at Ursula von der Leyen, who has been legally condemned by the Court of Justice, for non-transparency on the vaccines on the 17th of July 24, and the next day she has been elected to become president of the European Commission, you feel like, why can one person be prosecuted by court with a court ruling in place, but still become president of the commission, and why another person who has a court ruling against her can't become a candidate for elections. I mean, there is a lawfare sort of problem here, and it's totally problematic for democracy, because if we have sort of different law standards, yeah, who is prosecuted, who not? For plagiarism, I mean, what they bring against me, yeah, I mean, just to give you this one, but Robert Habeck, the former German minister, yeah, in his dissertation, in his academic book, there's something like 48% of plagiarism in his book, right? And then University of Hamburg, because he did his PhD in Hamburg, University of Hamburg had a quick commission within 72 hours, and the commission said, no, no problem. There's much originality in the PhD of Mr. Habeck. It's totally fine. Yeah. In difference, I have 1.9 percentage mistakes, not 48, 1.9 mistakes. Yeah. And the University of Bonn fired me. So you could argue there's very double standards of who is chaste and who is not chaste. For much more mistakes, people are not chaste, and for minor mistakes, people are thrown out. Yeah, and a legal system that is not based on equal law is a non-democratic system. That's the essence of democracy, that law is equal for the citizens of a republic, right? So I think we are in fundamental problems, and I think you are right that the erosion of the liberal center and because they are fearful, they eliminate the critical voices. Yeah, I think it's a self-defense. Yeah, because they can, as you described the whole time, they don't argue. They just hold against you. That's Russian propaganda. Yeah.
It's it seems to appeal to the nature of human beings, though, because open societies, they suffer great under wars and when they're under threats, because this is really when the human instinct of the group solidarity kicks in, and we allow less people to deviate from the group. And it seems the last decade has been somewhat hard. If we go back again, as mentioned before, to 2016 with the election of Trump, when this was said to be the Russia gate, that everywhere around us the Russians were doing all the referendums from BRICS, and any an election that went the wrong way. So we had to look for all these enemies within who were secretly conspiring with the Russians. And then it's replaced almost immediately by COVID. And then this is the same, who's not following, this huge threat. Everyone has to follow, toe the line. Who's the one who undermining it? And again, we have to purge society as well. And then, of course, this is replaced immediately by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And again, who is out there trying to not understand, but legitimize the Russian invasion. So again, we have to go look for these enemies within who to purge. I mean, it's been a decade of this. So it's you can understand why the population, especially the younger, for them this has become normalized. There's nothing to do with a free society anymore. This is purging opposition.
And you are right to point to the war as a factor for doing this. Yeah, the war is the moment of contraction. Yeah, and who is the betrayer of the war? I mean, we had a war against COVID. It was Macron talked about a war against the virus. So we were in a war situation. It was very strange that Macron talked about a war against the virus. Yeah, because you don't shoot with tanks or whatever with bombs on a virus. Yeah, but we had the war sort of name against COVID, and then came Ukraine, and the war is I mean, there is a sociological contraction that the war society cannot allow defecting opinions, yeah, because then they are immediately the betrayers of the country. Landesverrat, high treason, how you say high treason, Hochverrat, Landesverrat, Hochverrat, yeah, and high treason. And Landesverräter is the most evil thing you want to be, yeah? You are basically betraying your country. And the thing is, it's not new. Remember the Dreyfus affair. Remember Dreyfus, who was that general and then also put into the anti-Semitic sort of corner. And legally, there was nothing. Years after, they found that there was just simply nothing in l'affaire Dreyfus. But for years, it was the affair of somebody who had a different opinion, yeah, on this. I think you are right in pointing to the fact that the contraction of public space and freedom of speech is a war phenomena, yeah, and a society being in war or driving into war can no longer allow free opinion exchange, yeah. It's um, it's a pity because I thought, I mean, honestly, my personal deception is I thought in Europe, we are beyond. I mean, we invented that European Union, Europe is no longer war. We had 70 years of Franco-German understanding, peace architecture with Russian. We would know that we don't divide academia or science or arts into nationalities. And then the Russian thing starts, and then we throw out the Russian artists of German, you know, the pianists and everybody, we throw them out of our theaters, although we admire the Russian artists. And at some point, we renationalize science and we renationalize arts. Although we are Europeans and we know that in terms of the Enlightenment and in terms of humanism, there's no such thing than nationalism in arts and in science. Yeah. I mean, you remember University of Bonn, I was in February 22. When the war started, we got a letter of the director that if we have a research cluster with Russian academics on board, we should throw them out and hire Ukrainians. But science is not about nationality. Science is about capacity beyond, I mean, beyond nationality. Yeah. I mean, the important thing is the value of the science. It's not relevant whether you are a Russian mathematician or a German or, you know, I mean, but that is our culture. So what I feel or resent strongly is the betrayal or the rupture of our own civilizatory standards, what we are doing here. Or, for instance, that we are in infringement with international law when we sanction Russian fortunes or Russian money, you know, in Swiss banks. Yeah. Even, I mean, in former war times, we weren't so much in infringement with our own standards of lawmaking, and that is disturbing, I feel.
Yeah, I was going to say the sanctions on German citizens who aren't allowed to come back to their own country. There's no law behind this, though. This is just executive, isn't it?
Executive, no court ruling, you
Yeah.
know, I mean, not even a judge who has seen it, no capacity to defend, no court accessible to because it's a EU directive to be on a sanction list. So what do you want to do against? Yeah, who puts you, who removes you from the sanction list? I mean, uh, it's disturbing. It's really disturbing. Yeah.
This idea of not accepting, firing Russian academics to hire Ukrainian ones. I thought we were kind of done with this, the hating people based on nationality. So I was asked as well, like, how should we hate all of them? Or should just hate soldiers, adults? Should we hate the newborn Russian babies? I mean, should we hate them all? It's very strange to me, the position, the place we're currently at, though. But
Yeah, but
uh,
that, we once upon a time, at least, we would distinguish between civil society and the war parties, yeah, and the military action in the fields. So look at any whatever American-led war, be it in Afghanistan, be it in Iraq, yeah. We didn't sanction Starbucks or whatever American company because the Americans were in war, yeah. We didn't do this. We didn't sanction products in the supermarkets. Yeah, we just pushed out Russian products out of the supermarkets when it all started. We didn't do the same for American invasion in Iraq. So there's also double standard here. That's the first thing. But we also had a time when the war in itself, which is bad enough, yeah, but would not impact on science, on arts, on, on society. And that was the, what I would call in German, die europäische Errungenschaft. That was the lesson learned out of the 20th century. That is when we came back and said, can we do Franco-German youth cooperation, understanding, and that is the basis on which we built that EU, which is now totally perverted. Yeah. But we are basically eroding the ground of what we learned in the 20th century. And for me, this is very, very bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it began a bit cautious in 2022. First, they began to say, well, the Russian athletes, they're kind of promoting Russia, so they're also part of Putin's war machine. Business owners, well, they're also paying tax, so they're part of Putin's war machines. And then we started going after, academics, tourists, chess players. I mean, anyone could be, anyone who was Russian was essentially a legitimate target. Anyone could bring legitimacy to Russia, So, and now we reached a point where we don't have to make excuses anymore. Instead, it's become a sign of virtue that, oh, and you have to almost excuse yourself or explain why some Russians are allowed to participate or even arrive in your country. It's yeah, it's a
I
very
mean, we
weird
have,
place to be.
I don't know how many million, I think we have 4 million Russians in Germany, the Wolga-Deutschen that came in the 90s.
Hmm.
We have a lot of, German Russian couples who are in Germany. Um, I mean, it's really weird what is happening. Yeah. By the way, to your information, but there's a very, very good book of my co-author, Endgame Europe, Hauke Ritz, who wrote a fantastic, fantastic book about why do we hate the Russians so much. It's a 300 pages book. I wish that this book could be published in English. It's now getting into Italian translation. Yeah. But English would obviously be better. But he does a very long analysis throughout the whole century, 20th century, how we could possibly end up in that, weird hate of Russia and the Russians. Probably also culturally induced, which means nobody speaks Russian. I mean, if everybody speaks English, everybody has been in New York and found New York, Big Apple, super great, or London, so you have an access to, you don't have an access to Russia. It's a different language. Nobody has been in youth exchange. No, few people have been to Moscow. This is also very interesting with respect to Germany because we have the 16 million former GDR citizen who have been in the Soviet Union sphere, yeah. And you see in polling the clear division on the war between the Eastern and the Western Germans. Yeah, the Eastern Germany is totally against that war because some of them still speak Russian and are familiar with, East German Russian exchange. And so familiarity is basically what makes you come beyond nationality. And that is what we learned in Europe. I mean, the whole European endeavor of the past century is get to know each other, build Erasmus, do youth exchange, get the students around our countries, learn the language of the other. And then you understand that he's a person like you and me, and that there's no such difference between a Finn and an Italian and a German and a Portuguese, right? And now we build that barrier in our mind that the Russian sort of normal life would be so different and awkward and whatever the Russian beasts sort of say. And that is really amazing that it works in Europe. You really feel like, what did we waste 70 years of European integration for? That's my question. Yeah.
Yeah, no, the suspension of human-to-human contacts, I think that will have huge consequences. And well, it's the whole logic that you have to be able to understand, put yourself in the shoes of the opponent. This is the path to peace. When the Russians invaded Ukraine, our former foreign minister, she actually said, the first thing she said was, this is not the time to understand, it's the time to condemn, which is a remarkable statement. But of course, she's a bit of a war hawk. And yeah, this is kind of the direction we took. Until 3 years ago, this country had a rule. We did not send weapons to countries at war, and we always encouraged diplomacy and negotiations. Now we had 3 years of boycotting, even diplomacy. Forget about negotiations. Even talking to the other side is not just rejected, but it's seen as some kind of a moral virtue that we don't even talk to them. That's how good we are. And of course, we have yeah, former Prime Minister and yeah, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, essentially with this mantra that weapons are the path to peace. which is what the whole country is now following, which is it's uh, it's terrifying that the whole country has kind of unified under this, that this somehow is normal. Yeah, it's really shocking.
Remember Oslo? I mean, Oslo was the place for peace talks. It was the place of the Oslo Agreement in the Israel-Palestine conflict in the late 90s. It was the place, Camp David, Oslo. I mean, you have all these. I was in Oslo a couple of times. And you have this Peace Institute, and there is a culture. But Finland is similar. You had this Finlandization, sort of special topos of the Finnish foreign policy culture. And now they have a border, they have closed the border with NATO, yeah. And so the border, which was open, and there were many Russians having land houses, I mean, spas and nice, land houses on the Finnish side, right? Which were basically doing good economies to the Finnish part. And now, because of NATO engagement, and then they needed to close the borders with, how do you call this, Stacheldraht, Barbelé, this iron things, yeah. The Finns were basically betraying or kicking down the road 70 years of a special arrangement, Finlandisierung, sort of geostrategic approach with Russia. And then I have Finnish friends who tell me that's totally absurd. I mean, it feels totally absurd for those Finns living there, because there were no such thing than stress with the Russian side, right? So it's imposed to societies. Yeah, and the real question is, how do we Europeans and we academics, what are our chances to move out of this, other than talking to each other and saying this is problematic? Thank you for the conversation. But what could be the means to mobilize, to reach other academics for what we want and think? I mean, what would be the tools to move us out of this? It's not so easy, yeah.
No.
Because you are expulsed. I feel I'm already expulsed. You will probably.
Yeah, I'm going there.
You're
It seems.
going there. Then again, I mentioned Johannes Warwick and a couple of other persons. So, and then what happens is the others are silencing, yeah, because nobody wants this. I mean, everybody has kids, everybody has a rent to pay. And so we are silencing our platforms of thought, which is the university. And
Yeah, no, I noticed that, but that's the culture of intimidation too. That's the whole purpose. I do get emails from the former like top diplomats in the country and other academics, but nobody would stick their head out in public because then the same thing would happen to them. So, but
precisely what I experienced. I
yeah,
have, there are 500 professors at University of Bonn, which is a huge university and a very smart one. I don't do bad mouth talking about the University of Bonn. It's a very smart university. I'd love to be there. I love teaching there. Smart town, smart place, everything is fine. And they are excellency cluster. Yeah. So very good mathematicians. What is happening that outspokenly there's no support because people are silenced or intimidated. But behind the doors, you get the emails, Mrs. Guérot, this is really so tragic. What is happening to you? But in proportion, the people writing to me is 5 professors out of 500. So it's 1%. 1% who talk to me. Yeah, 1%.
it's extraordinary. Anyways, I want to thank you so much for your time. It's been great talking to you. I hope that you'll come back on as there's a lot of things I want to discuss as well about democracy in Europe and the future of European integration. But I guess that becomes a big topic of its own. So thank you again.
No, I thank you. And if we could stay in touch in whatever way and perhaps think with others who are also affected by what is happening, create a little network. I think all this would be helpful. And if we could organize this cross borders, because we see that you have the problem, I have the problem in 2 different European countries, I think there is time for some decent action, not mobilization, but I think we should not, perhaps this conversation helps to alert some others, because my sentiment is that when countries are losing universities, they're losing their thinking. It's a huge epistemic sort of rupture. Yeah. If you're losing the universities as place for exchange, of open exchange, then society is also betrayed. So it's not only a problem of academics, it's a problem of society that is losing their universities.
Oh, that's a great idea. I do have a few names for you, so
Yeah.
let's stay in touch. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah, bye bye.